What keeps you up at night? Too much coffee? Studying for an exam? Or just plain insomnia? I don't have an exact answer why I can't sleep sometimes nowadays, but I sure have one for when I was younger. Ready for it? I bet you are. Before the days of kids getting tablets before they can even talk, during the days where YouTube videos could barely even load, there was the Nintendo DS. This was my first true game system, and many of my friends' first system. Of course, my mom forced me to wait until I was 10 to even get one, so I was a little late to the party, but looking back at it, maybe it was for the better. The first DS I ever owned was the DS Lite, and I loved it. I loved playing Scribblenauts, Drawn to Life SpongeBob Edition, and then later on New Super Mario Bros. And all the fun first-party games. But there was one game I always saw advertised that made me really want to upgrade to the DSi, and it wasn't the cameras. It was this exclusive game called Flipnote Studio. I loved to draw and I loved watching cartoons, and to see a game where I could make my very own was something I was dying to play. I wanted a DS just to play Drawn to Life SpongeBob Edition, so a game where I could make my very own cartoons was very enticing. So, I eventually upgraded, gave my DS Lite to my brother, and entered the world of Flipnote Studio. In case you've never heard of Flipnote Studio, I'll explain what it is briefly. Flipnote Studio is really more of a tool than a game that would allow you to create your own animations using the DSi touchscreen. The user interface is easy to understand and easy to use. You're limited to only using black, blue, or red ink, so there were a few limitations to kind of make it seem like you were handwriting a college essay, but it wasn't really designed to be an animation tool. When I first started using it, I was having a blast. I loved being able to create my own animations, and despite them being the quality you'd expect from a 10-year-old, I always wanted to make that stellar Flipnote. I also had a lot of fun watching the preloaded Flipnotes. You know, these ones. Flipnote Studio was great, but making Flipnotes was the tip of the iceberg on why I loved it so much. It took me a few days to notice, but there was a green button that said Flipnote Hatena, and once I clicked it for the first time, having a good night's sleep was out of the question for a long time. Flipnote Hatena was essentially the YouTube of Flipnotes. It was a hub where anyone could share their own Flipnotes to the world, and over the years, I had so much fun with it. This would be the part where I discuss my favorite Flipnotes and talk about them, but instead, I feel the Flipnotes speak more for themselves and really say a lot about that era. So here's a compilation of some of the most iconic Flipnotes.
Chicken wing, hot dog and bologna, chicken and macaroni, chillin' with my Shut up! Where's the mountain? It's right there. Where's the mountain? It's right there. So where's the mountain?
Oh my god, look, it's right there. See where I'm pointing? Look where I'm pointing. So stupid and retarded. Huh.
So where's the mountain?
And why is that bag on your head?
Why? Oh, no reason. Except you didn't let me.
Looking back at a lot of these Flipnotes, they're the humor and content you'd expect from the late 2000s and early 2010s. Dora jokes, Justin Bieber, Ouija, the awesome face, the awesome Dora Bieber face, all of it was common throughout Flipnote Hatena. The most common Flipnotes out there were, without a doubt, music videos and recreations of scenes from TV shows or YouTube videos. They ranged from the I Ain't Got No iPhone song to Greg's sociopath Heffley singing Blue, and varied in quality. Here are some of my favorites.
In the kitchen, you can't find them. Your chips are no more. No more Fritos, no more Twinkies, just some crumbs on the floor. Where's my cookies? Where's my candy? The cupboard's bare. No more soda, no more Cheetos. It isn't fair. No, it isn't okay. It isn't okay. It isn't okay.
On and on and on. It's the return of Donkey Kong. Yeah, I put my hands up in the air sometimes. Thank you, Retro and Nintendo. 100 bananas for an extra life. Get on the rhino, kitty, let's go. 'Cause we gon' slap the ground. We gon' throw headbutts. We gon' roll along like it's Donkey Kong.
Of course, though, with all apps like this where you have users creating their own stuff, there were the lazy, no-effort Flipnotes. Because you could easily download Flipnotes, what would happen is Flipnotes that weren't locked could easily be edited, have a few colors or the speed changed, and then re-uploaded. There were also a ton of Flipnotes that showed a picture of an iPod and just had part of a popular song back then playing in the background. Stolen Flipnotes were a pretty big problem throughout Hatena, and that's why you would constantly see different versions of the no iPhone Flipnote, Chicken Wing, and countless others. There were also the infamous star-begging Flipnotes. Stars were the rating system for Flipnotes, and if you liked them, you could give them stars. There were so many Flipnotes begging for stars, from games that said, give stars to win a prize, to add stars to save Mario from Ouija. But besides the iconic Flipnotes, there were a ton of Flipnotes that truly took advantage of the software and were great. Here are some of my favorites. As you can see, there were a lot of creators that had a lot of talent for animation, and I wonder what a lot of them are up to nowadays. Needless to say, I spent countless hours on Flipnote Hatena, and if the DSi had an activity log like the 3DS does, I'd honestly be horrified to see how many hours I put into it. Looking back, Flipnote Hatena is certainly a product of its time. The Flipnotes mostly revolved around the humor during that era, and there aren't too many Flipnotes I can call timeless, but that's why I look back on it so fondly. It reminds me of an era that's unlike any other, and it gives me a lot of nostalgia going back. But what's not dated is the idea of Flipnote Studio. The concept of being able to create your own animations and share them to the world will always be appealing. So, what ended up happening to Flipnote Studio? By 2012, things were slowing down for the DS. The last major games released for it were Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, and it was clear all focus was headed towards the 3DS. And in March of 2013, Nintendo announced that Flipnote Hatena was shutting down May 31st of that year. Disappointing, sure, but there was a good reason why it was shutting down. That's because Flipnote Studio 3D was announced to release in the summer of that year. Flipnote Studio 3D was a pretty solid upgrade from Flipnote Studio, with more color options, the added 3D, and a few other features. Sounds great, right? Everything worked out fine. In Japan. But things took a spin elsewhere. If you were a Nintendo fan during the 3DS and Wii U era, you probably know exactly how backwards Nintendo was, especially towards Nintendo of America. Things like having the regular new 3DS with the faceplates not have a proper release, making North America wait over 4 months to play Yoshi's Woolly World, and the unforgivable amiibo shortages. And unfortunately, the way Nintendo handled Flipnote Studio 3D was one of the most backwards things they did during the era. Originally, Flipnote Studio 3D got delayed internationally because of unexpected high usage of the servers in Japan. Disappointing, but understandable. What wasn't understandable, though, was the delay of almost 2 years. But eventually, in February of 2015, we finally got Flipnote Studio 3D. But why did it never catch on like the original did? During the period of the delay, SwapNote was shut down because a few users were using it to send inappropriate messages. This incident happened in Japan and only Japan, but the rest of the world faced the consequences. Nintendo has never been good at understanding online services, and it's still something they struggle with to this day, so this wasn't too surprising that they do this. And I didn't use SwapNote anyway, so I wasn't too upset. but this caused a domino effect, also affecting Flipnote Studio 3D. Using the international version of Flipnote Studio 3D is essentially the same as it would be in Japan while making Flipnotes. All the new colors, 3D effects, everything to make Flipnotes is here. But there is a major issue with it, and that's the fact that there is no Flipnote gallery world or any way to share and view Flipnotes uploaded by users. You can still share them locally, but who's gonna do that? Flipnote Hatena is 75% of what made Flipnote Studio so fond to me and many others, and just to remove it because there were a few bad apples, made Flipnote Studio 3D a disappointment. You know, it's a shame Flipnote Studio 3D turned out the way it did, but on the other end, it made my memories of Flipnote Hatena even stronger. Would I have liked to see Flipnote Gallery World release? Absolutely. But even though it didn't, Flipnote Hatena will always remind me of that period from the late 2000s to very early 2010s that was just a simpler time. The times where you'd get sick of hearing Dreamscape 009, but laugh every time you heard Spaghetti or Ouija. Flipnote Studio will always be a product from that era for me, and you know what? Maybe that isn't so bad.